we're taking a look at the story around Auction Alliance right now. If you need a refresher into the story, it refers to a so-called kickback scandal which links banking staff to the auction house. The implications are that staff were receiving irregular payments for pushing business the way of Auction Alliance. Investec was one of the banks named, and Chief Executive Stephen Koseff joins us in studio right now. Stephen, thank you very much for your time. If you can take us through the allegations in a nutshell.
I think there were a number of allegations made. I think the key allegation was that 2 members of our staff received some form of a kickback to refer business to Auction Alliance. So, we've asked for evidence so that we can investigate the matter, and no evidence was forthcoming. We were asked by this particular program to respond to certain questions, which we did do in writing, and we believe that we were unfairly represented on that particular program. We don't do a lot of auctions. We've had about 70 in 10 years, and therefore we could not be a major client of an auctioneering firms. However, we take very seriously the accusation that some of our staff members are behaving in an untoward fashion. It's clearly outside the scope of our policy. If we discover that kind of behavior, we would immediately take disciplinary action, and if it's criminal, we would hand it over to the prosecuting authorities.
And you have embarked on an internal investigation?
We have embarked on an internal investigation. Some of the documentation that they raised last night on the program is 10, 11 years old, and we obviously have to get to the bottom of that particular documentation in itself. It wasn't really evidence of any untoward behavior, just was an amount, the so-called paid to Investec.
One of the liquidations being referred to is MKB. Do you have a stance on that company liquidation?
Well, they defaulted on us in 2008, and they were uncooperative, so we ended up having to go the liquidation route, which is very normal in the banking sector. And they're claiming that we only liquidated them to protect another client, which we find absurd, because at that stage, the client wasn't even in any kind of financial difficulty. So the reality is they didn't pay us back on due date. They defaulted on their obligations, and we had to exercise our rights, and we've been fighting with them in court for 4 years.
Stephen, do you have any idea of how much money is supposed to be involved in the kickback side of the scandal? In other words, is it significant money that is attributable to the kickbacks?
I actually haven't a clue. The numbers that they accused our staff taking, one was 27,000 Rand. I don't even remember what the other amount was. That was 10 years ago. But we obviously are doing our investigations, and we have actually no clue about the amounts. They had massive amounts going into a company called Meradex or Merabex.
That's the company I was going to ask you about, Merabex.
Yeah, I never heard of it until last night. But an individual that worked for Auction Alliance that we hired about 8 months ago has some kind of relationship with that company. Apparently his remuneration structure was such that whatever commission he got for whatever work he did as an employee of Auction Alliance, because I understand that they're on commission, went into this particular company. Now, the company is owned by his father, who's a valuer, and the accusation was that the father was overcharging for valuations, therefore it was kickbacks, but apparently this was just his commission that he was entitled to in the ordinary course of his daily duties that was paid into the company. Again, that's a matter that we don't know much about, but would be part of our investigation.
And also there were accusations that certain auctions were rigged in terms of the pricing, etc. Do you think there's any recourse for any individuals to actually go and look back at certain auctions in terms of the pricing that's out there?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for us was they spoke about 3 auctions on the program. One was a house that we sold to third parties under auction for 6 million Rand. They said they took a picture of the house today and showed that it looked like it was worth a lot more than 6 million Rand, but it was half complete at the time. So this is what they don't tell you. Another was a situation where we had an individual who died, who owed us 50 million Rand. A third party actually brought an application to liquidate, and we got our 50 million Rand back. The house was sold for 65 million Rand. In this particular case, they sort of accused us of being very ruthless and not allowing the estate to go through some kind of due process. So there are all sorts of crazy accusations which, if you look at the actual facts, have no foundation whatsoever.
Stephen, thanks very much for clarifying Investec's stance on
Thank
this
you.
auction alliance scenario. I can't let you go without asking you about the banking environment in South Africa. The consumer out there, Brian Joffe just a moment ago referring to the consumer being relatively fragile but looking positively to that momentum continuing. What are your thoughts?
I think one does feel that the South African environment is improving, and that obviously you haven't seen that much demand for credit, but it has been improving over the last while, as the macro stats will tell you. I think low interest rates are helping people service their obligations, and you've got a mixture, mostly deleveraging, that is taking place, which is a global phenomena. So I do think that corporate South Africa is in a very comfortable space. Individuals who are over leveraged have been deleveraging, and I think that's good. If that process, they will start spending at a point in time. Obviously the wild card is what is going on in Europe, where you mentioned that Brian mentioned the banking sector
is in the doldrums.
It is in the doldrums, and the amount of deleveraging taking place there over the next couple of years will still be quite substantial. However, the way I see it is Europe is muddling through. It's not the way we would like to see it done. It's certainly not the way the Americans would like to see it done, but they are dealing with issues step by step. And as long as you don't get any kind of disorderly process taking place, I think then Europe won't fall over a precipice. It might be in a mild recession or in a recession, but it will start recovering from here on out. I think people don't understand the amount of stimulus that the European Central Bank, which is really the hero of the day, if you think about this 3-year money that they've provided for the system, because that was the big worry. How are they going to fund themselves? Now you can get unlimited funding provided you deliver the right asset to the discount window at quite low pricing for 3 years. So what an Italian bank will do then is they will tender for their 50 billion so-called euros, and then they'll go and buy Italian government debt and earn a 4% spread. And that is highly profitable activity and is recapitalizing the system indirectly. So they say they don't believe in QE, they're doing QE through another mechanism.
Are you eyeing any potential bargains in that European banking system? Of course, Brian's saying that the corporate Europe is actually not in a bad shape at all, and certainly from a price perspective, not interesting. Banking?
No, I don't think we want to buy any banks in Europe. I think what we would try and benefit from is the kind of deleveraging process that is taking place, that a lot of competitor banks are sort of saying, I'm not doing this. Certainly anything that's outside their core economic environment, they're leaving alone, and that certainly helps a bank of our type.
Kevin, I've been ignoring you.
You have been, actually. Stephen, I'll just ask you about property, residential property. Yes. If you look at the mortgage advances in South Africa, specifically to residential, that remains very low. I think the last number I saw was 1.8% growth.
Yeah.
Is your sense that we're likely to see that number pick up over the next, let's say over the next year, or is it something that the banking sector is not really going to chase, so to speak? I mean, we've seen unsecured credit grow at a very rapid pace, but mortgage definitely, obviously, has lagged. Do you think that changes?
I think that some of the banks have changed their philosophy with regard to mortgage credit, and therefore rather said, I'd rather do unsecured lending to a particular market segment. I get better pricing, and I'm still taking the same degree of risk, and it's going to be a lot more profitable. So I think that in the traditional mortgage sector, people are still very conservative, and they have been deleveraging, and therefore there's a fair amount of supply because banks probably still have some stock, and it takes time for a housing market to gain traction. You've got housing commentators out there saying that they still see real house price decline. In absolute terms, maybe not so fast, but real house price decline, which holds buyers back. But you are seeing movement. I mean, we are seeing on some of our problems the ability to clear stuff, which it's the first time in probably 3 years that you're actually seeing the ability to clear.
Stephen, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks,
Stephen
Bronwyn.
Koseff is, of course, the CEO of Investec